Omega accidentally bound to the wrong Alpha King. A fate mistake that shook the pack. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Chloe Williams was no stranger to disappointment. A quiet Omega in a world ruled by powerful alphas and betas, she had never fit in. Despite her kind heart and healing abilities, her lack of scent, something every Omega relied on to attract a mate, made her invisible to the pack. She had been passed over again and again, left to watch others find their place in the pack, while she remained on the outskirts. Her life was a series of rejections, and though she tried her best to hold her head high, the weight of isolation was a constant companion. But things were about to change in a way she never expected. On the night of the pack's annual mating ceremony, Chloe found herself standing alone in the shadows, watching as the alphas and betas paired off, leaving her once more in the cold. Her heart ached with the sting of loneliness, but it was nothing new. Just as the last couple was about to leave the gathering, she felt a strange pull, a force, like a thread, that tugged at her chest. She turned, and there, in the distance, stood a figure cloaked in shadows. He was tall, imposing, with an air of power that made everyone around him take notice. His eyes, silver like the moon, locked onto hers, and in that instant, everything in Chloe's world shifted. She had no idea who he was, only that the connection between them was undeniable. Without a word, he moved toward her. The crowd parted, and whispers followed in his wake. As he reached her, he said nothing at first, only observing her with those piercing eyes. Chloe felt the air between them hum with energy, as if something ancient was awakening. Then, to her shock, the words that left his lips were nothing she had prepared for. You're mine. Before she could respond, a surge of energy rushed through her, and Chloe felt something inside her bind to him. It was a mistake of fate. She had accidentally bound herself to the wrong Alpha King. Maximus Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, was a force of nature, a leader revered and feared by all. No one had dared defy him, and yet, here was Chloe, a simple Omega, now bound to him in a way no one could explain. Her heart raced with fear and wonder as the weight of the situation began to sink in. She had not meant to claim him, nor had she ever imagined that someone like him would be drawn to her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Little did she know, this mistake would change everything. The pack would never be the same. Chloe stood frozen, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. She had no idea what had just happened, but she knew something deep within her had shifted, something irreversible. Maximus Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, was standing in front of her, his presence so overwhelming that it felt as if the entire room was holding its breath. His silver eyes bore into hers, and for a fleeting moment, Chloe saw something behind them, a glimpse of vulnerability, of something deeper than the power he projected to the world. You're mine, he repeated, his voice low, almost like a command, yet there was something soft in it, something that made Chloe's heart race even faster. She wanted to protest, to argue that she hadn't chosen this, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't explain it, but it felt like fate itself had chosen for her. She had no choice but to obey. The bond was already forming between them, and it was stronger than anything she had ever felt. Chloe's mind was swirling with confusion and fear. She wasn't sure what this connection meant, or why it had happened, but the pull was undeniable. Maximus, despite his cold exterior, was now a part of her life, and she his. The pack would never accept this. The Omega who had been rejected, the one with no scent, bound to the most powerful alpha in the land? It was unthinkable. Maximus seemed to sense her hesitation, his expression softening ever so slightly. You're scared, he said, as if he could read every thought in her mind. I understand, but you don't have to be. Chloe shook her head, still too overwhelmed to speak. She didn't know what to feel. This was a mistake, wasn't it? She had bound herself to the wrong Alpha King, the one who ruled with an iron fist, whose reputation for ruthlessness was known throughout the territories. And yet, as the bond between them deepened, Chloe couldn't deny the strange sense of belonging that was growing inside her. Maximus was a king, a ruler, someone who had never known weakness. And she, an Omega who had been discarded by her own pack, was now his fated mate. It didn't make sense. She had always been the one left behind, the one ignored. Yet, here she was, bound to the most feared and revered alpha in all the lands. Maximus took a step closer to her, his hand reaching out slowly, as if unsure of how she would react. His fingers brushed against her arm, and Chloe felt a jolt of energy surge through her. It was as if every nerve in her body was alive, reacting to him in ways she didn't understand. "Trust me," he whispered, his voice almost gentle. "I'll protect you. I'll keep you safe, Chloe." His words should have been comforting, but they only made her feel more conflicted. How could she trust him? How could she trust someone who had the power to destroy everything in his path? And yet, despite the fear that churned in her stomach, she couldn't help but believe him. The bond was real, and no matter how hard she tried to fight it, it was a part of her now. Chloe looked up at Maximus, meeting his gaze for the first time without looking away. There was something in his eyes, a deep, simmering pain that she hadn't noticed before. For all his power, for all his dominance, he was still a man who carried burdens, who had been shaped by experiences she couldn't imagine. She didn't know what was going to happen next. She didn't know how they could make this work. But she did know one thing. Her life was no longer hers alone. It belonged to Maximus now. And as terrifying as that thought was, Chloe couldn't deny the strange thrill that coursed through her at the thought of it. She was bound to him, and together, they would face whatever the future held. Maximus stood before Chloe, his presence commanding the room in a way that only an alpha king could. The silence between them was thick, charged with the bond that had been formed between them so unexpectedly. Chloe felt a swirl of emotions inside her. Fear, confusion, but also something she couldn't quite place. Maximus seemed to sense her hesitation, and his voice, once so firm and unyielding, softened. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said, his words quiet but sincere. Chloe's gaze met his, and for a moment, she saw beyond the cold exterior, beyond the strength and power that defined him. There was something more to him, something fragile, buried deep within. "I'm not afraid of you," she replied, though even she could hear the doubt in her own voice. The bond between them was undeniable, and as much as she wanted to resist, she couldn't. Chloe had always been the one left behind, the one overlooked, and now she was tied to the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom. "Then trust me," Maximus said, his voice still low but with a hint of urgency. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but not threatening. "I know this is all a lot to take in, but I'll protect you. No one will hurt you again, Chloe." Chloe took a step back, her mind racing. She had always been invisible to her pack, an Omega without scent, rejected by her own kind. And now she was here, bound to a man who ruled with absolute power. What could she possibly offer him? What could someone like her offer someone like him? "I don't know how this works," Chloe said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what to do." Maximus looked at her with something akin to tenderness in his gaze. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Not yet. Just be yourself. That's all I ask." Chloe wasn't sure if she could ever fully accept this reality, but as she stood there, staring up at the man before her, something inside her stirred. A feeling she had never experienced before. She wasn't alone anymore. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him, to believe that maybe, just maybe, this bond could be something more than a mistake of fate. "How do we move forward?" she asked, her voice steadying as she took another small step toward him. Maximus smiled faintly, his expression softening further. "One step at a time," he said. "You're not alone in this, Chloe. We'll figure it out together." Chloe wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She was bound to the Alpha King, but maybe, just maybe, this mistake of fate would lead to something she had never dared dream of. A future where she wasn't invisible, where she wasn't rejected. A future where she could stand beside him, not as a broken Omega, but as something more. "Okay," Chloe said softly, her voice filled with a quiet determination. Together, Maximus reached out, his hand gently brushing hers. and for a moment, everything else faded away. There was only the two of them, standing on the edge of something new, something unknown. And for the first time in her life, Chloe didn't feel like she was just waiting to be chosen. She was chosen by him, and that was all that mattered. As they stood there, in the silence of the room, Chloe realized that her life was no longer defined by rejection. It was defined by the bond they shared, a bond that would change everything. Chloe stood at the edge of the balcony, her gaze sweeping over the sprawling kingdom below. The moon hung high in the sky, its silver light bathing the land in a soft, ethereal glow. She could hear the faint rustle of the wind, the distant howl of wolves in the forest beyond the castle walls. For the first time since her world had been turned upside down, Chloe felt a sense of peace settle within her. It was as if everything, all the chaos and uncertainty, was finally starting to make sense. She was here, at the side of Maximus Blackwood, the Alpha King. She had been bound to him by fate, a bond she hadn't asked for, but one that had become a part of her. And now, standing in the quiet of the night, she realized that she was no longer the outcast, the one left behind. She was his. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Maximus had kept his distance, not out of coldness, but because of the responsibility he carried. As the Alpha King, his every move, his every decision, had consequences. But Chloe had learned that he wasn't the tyrant she had once imagined. He was a man, a ruler burdened by the weight of his position, but also someone who cared deeply for those close to him. As the days passed, Chloe found herself becoming more and more integrated into the palace. She attended meetings with him, helped with small matters of the court, and slowly began to see the world through his eyes. The challenges he faced as king were not what she had expected. He didn't just rule with power. He ruled with wisdom and a deep sense of justice. But even with all his strength, Chloe could see the cracks in his armor. There were moments when his guard would slip, when his eyes would darken with the weight of past decisions. And in those moments, Chloe would be there, quietly offering him her presence, her support. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Chloe found herself lost in thought. She had never imagined her life would take this turn. From the moment she had been bound to him, everything had changed. The pack was still skeptical, still unsure of her place, but Maximus had made it clear. She was his mate, and no one would take that from her. Chloe, Maximus said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze. There was a softness in his expression that she had never seen before. You don't have to be afraid anymore, he continued, his voice low and steady. I won't let anyone hurt you. I won't let them make you feel less than what you are. Chloe's heart swelled at his words. She had never known someone who cared so deeply for her, who was willing to fight for her, no matter the cost. I'm not afraid of you, she replied, her voice filled with a quiet strength she hadn't realized she possessed. Maximus smiled, his eyes softening. Good, he said, because you are not just some Omega. You are my Luna, and I will never let you forget that. The words sent a thrill through Chloe's chest, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. She wasn't just his mate by accident. She was his equal, his partner. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. As they sat there, under the light of the moon, Chloe realized that this was just the beginning. The bond between them was strong, and it was only growing stronger with each passing day. She had been chosen by fate, but now, she was choosing him, too. The Alpha King and the Omega, bound by a mistake of fate, but united by something far stronger, love. The days passed in a blur for Chloe, each one filled with new experiences, new challenges, and a deeper connection with Maximus. She had started to feel like she truly belonged here in the palace, at his side. The tension that had once hung between them had gradually melted away, replaced by an understanding that neither of them had expected. Maximus had made it clear that she was not just his mate by fate, but by choice as well. And though Chloe had her doubts, about herself, about their bond, she couldn't deny the undeniable pull she felt toward him. He was her alpha, but he was also her protector, her confidant, and, slowly, her friend. There were still moments of unease, moments when Chloe would catch the skeptical glances of the pack, still unsure of her place. They whispered about her, about how she had been the Omega who had once been left behind, now suddenly thrust into the heart of the pack as the Alpha King's chosen mate. But Maximus never let her doubt herself, never let anyone question her worth. He was always there, his unwavering presence a constant reminder that she was more than they had ever believed her to be. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maximus and Chloe found themselves alone in the garden. The scent of jasmine filled the air, and the distant sound of wolves howling echoed through the night. Chloe sat on a bench, her thoughts wandering as she gazed at the stars above. Maximus stood beside her, his gaze distant, his posture rigid, as if he was lost in thought. She could tell something was weighing on him. "Maximus," she said softly, her voice carrying in the stillness of the evening. "What's on your mind?" He turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment before he softened. "It's the pack," he said quietly. "They're still not fully accepting of you. Of us. I can feel their uncertainty, their doubts. I don't know how to make them see that you are my Luna, that you belong here just as much as I do." Chloe looked up at him, her heart aching for him. She knew the burden of leadership weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had fought for so long to protect his pack, to earn their respect, and now, with their bond, he was fighting for her too. "You don't have to prove anything to them," Chloe said, her voice steady. "I don't need their approval. I just need you." Maximus's gaze softened, and for a moment, he looked like the man she had come to know, the man who had shown her kindness, who had protected her when she had nothing left. "You have me," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Always." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional distant howl of a wolf. It was in these quiet moments that Chloe realized how far they had come. From the day they had been bound by fate to this moment, she had slowly begun to see the truth. She wasn't just his maiden name. She was his equal, his partner, and together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. The pack might still have their doubts, but Chloe knew that their bond was unbreakable. She didn't need their acceptance. She didn't need their approval. What mattered was that she had found a place in this world, a place by Maximus's side, and that was enough. As the night grew darker and the stars twinkled above them, Chloe felt a sense of peace settle within her. She was not the outcast anymore. She was not the one left behind. She was the Luna of the Northern Territories, the mate of the Alpha King, and no one could take that from her. The days seemed to blend together for Chloe as she settled further into life as the Luna by Maximus's side. Despite the weight of their bond, there was a newfound sense of peace in her heart. She was no longer an outsider, no longer the Omega who had been cast aside. She had a place now, and it was beside the Alpha King. Maximus, ever the leader, continued to carry the responsibilities of his kingdom with an unwavering resolve. But Chloe saw the toll it took on him. There were moments, late at night, when he would retreat into the solitude of his study, his face drawn with exhaustion. Chloe had learned that ruling wasn't just about power. It was about sacrifice, about making decisions that could break your heart in order to protect those you loved. It was a burden she knew well, and one that she would share with him, even if he didn't always ask for it. One evening, as the sun began to set, Chloe found herself standing in the garden once again, her thoughts drifting like the breeze around her. The scent of the blooming roses filled the air, a reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world, despite everything. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the calmness of the moment wash over her. It was then that she felt a familiar presence behind her. Maximus stood there, his towering form casting a long shadow over her. She turned to face him, and their eyes met. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice soft but filled with concern. Chloe smiled, a small, reassuring smile. "Just thinking," she replied. "About what?" he asked, stepping closer. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. "About us," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "About how much has changed. How much I've changed." Maximus raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And how have you changed?" Chloe looked up at him, her gaze steady. "I used to think I was invisible," she said. "I used to think I didn't matter. But now I realize that I do. I matter to you, and I matter to this pack." Maximus's expression softened, and he reached out to gently take her hand in his. "You've always mattered," he said. "You've just never seen it. But I've always known." The sincerity in his voice made Chloe's heart swell. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of being alone, of being unwanted. But now, With Maximus, she knew she was no longer that girl. She was someone who had a place, someone who was seen. "I'm proud of you, Chloe," Maximus continued, his thumb brushing over her hand. "You've grown stronger than I ever could have imagined. And I'll stand by you, no matter what comes." Chloe felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Together, they had come so far, and they would continue to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the evening sky turned darker, filled with the shimmering light of countless stars, Chloe knew one thing for certain. She was not just the Omega who had been chosen by fate. She was his equal, his Luna, and nothing could take that away from her. Maximus's presence beside her, strong and unwavering, was a constant reminder that they were a team. They were bound not just by fate, but by love, a love that was slowly growing stronger with each passing day. And for Chloe, that was enough. The moon hung low in the sky, casting its pale light over the kingdom. As Chloe walked through the palace gardens, her thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and wonder. Life had changed so drastically for her in such a short time. She had gone from being the overlooked, rejected Omega to the Luna by Maximus's side. The transition wasn't easy, but with each passing day, she felt herself becoming stronger. The pack, once filled with skepticism and doubt about her place, was slowly beginning to accept her, but there were still moments of tension. Chloe had learned to navigate the complexities of royal life, the subtle politics, and the delicate dance of maintaining peace between the factions that made up their world. But it was never easy. There were always whispers in the corridors, always eyes watching her, waiting for her to stumble. Yet, through it all, Maximus was there, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of uncertainty. He had been her protector, her guide, and now, more than ever, her equal. She could feel the bond between them growing stronger, not just as mates, but as partners. Maximus had never treated her as anything less than that. She had always feared being overshadowed by his power, his strength, but now, she stood beside him, no longer as an outsider, but as someone who was a part of his world. She had her own role to play, and she was learning to embrace it. As the days passed, their connection deepened, and with it, a shared understanding of what it meant to rule. Chloe had come to understand that being Luna wasn't just about standing by his side. It was about supporting him in ways no one else could, offering him the peace and balance he so desperately needed. She had found her strength, not in defying him or fighting against the expectations of others, but in standing with him, in loving him and being loved in return. One evening, as they sat together in the royal chambers, the weight of the world seemed to be on Maximus's shoulders. He was lost in thought, his brow furrowed as he stared out the window at the distant hills, the stars twinkling above. Chloe could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the burden of leadership taking its toll. She knew the pressure he was under, the responsibility that came with being Alpha King. She had seen the sacrifices he made, the decisions he had to make, and the price he paid for every victory. She couldn't help but worry about him. "Maximus," she said softly, breaking the silence. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently. He let out a long, weary sigh, his shoulders slumping slightly. "It's the pack," he admitted, his voice low. "There's always something. Always someone to worry about. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find peace, if I'll ever be able to give them the stability they need without sacrificing everything else." Chloe reached out, placing her hand on his, offering him a quiet comfort. "You're doing the best you can," she said. "You've already given them so much. And you've given me so much too." Maximus's gaze softened, and he squeezed her hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said, his voice filled with an emotion Chloe had rarely heard. It was vulnerability, raw and unguarded. Chloe smiled softly, her heart swelling with affection. "You don't have to do it alone," she replied. "We're in this together." For a long moment, they sat in silence, their hands still intertwined, each drawing strength from the other. Chloe realized then that, despite the challenges they faced, despite the doubts and fears that still lingered, they were a team. Together, they could face anything. As the night stretched on and the stars above grew brighter, Chloe felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had found her place, not just in Maximus's world, but in the world they were building together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it, side by side with the Alpha King who had claimed her heart. The weeks passed, and the bond between Chloe and Maximus only grew stronger. Life in the palace had become a delicate balance of duty and personal moments, and Chloe found herself more at ease with her role as Luna. The pack, once filled with doubt and skepticism, was beginning to accept her, though there were still whispers in the corners of the court. Yet, Maximus's unwavering support kept her grounded, and with each passing day, she felt more like the true partner to the Alpha King that she had always hoped to be. One afternoon, as Chloe walked through the halls of the castle, she couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the air. The tension that had once been so palpable was lessening, replaced by a quiet respect. It seemed that the pack, and even the most hardened members of the court, were starting to recognize her as an integral part of the kingdom's future. But Chloe knew that acceptance would not come without challenges. The world they lived in was one of power, tradition, and history, and as the Luna, she had a responsibility to be more than just a figurehead. She had to prove herself, not only to the pack, but to herself as well. As she wandered into the royal garden, she saw Maximus standing by the fountain, his back to her. His broad shoulders were tense, and Chloe could sense the weight of the decisions that always seemed to linger on his mind. She had seen him like this before, lost in thought, burdened by the demands of his kingdom. She approached him quietly, unsure of how to ease the tension she felt radiating off him. "Maximus," she called softly, her voice cutting through the silence. He turned to face her, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Chloe," he said, his voice warm despite the storm that brewed within him. "What's on your mind?" Chloe asked, stepping closer to him. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the toll that leadership had taken on him. "Everything," he said with a sigh, running a hand through his dark hair. "There's always something, another problem, another decision to make. It feels like I'm never truly free." Chloe's heart ached for him. She had come to understand the burden of leadership, the weight that came with every choice, every sacrifice. "You don't have to carry it all alone," she said gently. "I'm here with you, every step of the way." Maximus's gaze softened as he looked at her, his expression filled with both gratitude and something deeper. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm grateful for that, more than you could ever know." Chloe reached out and took his hand in hers, grounding him in the moment. "You've carried this kingdom for so long. It's time we share that weight together." Maximus looked down at their joined hands, his fingers tightening around hers. "Together," he echoed softly. Chloe smiled, the warmth of his words wrapping around her like a blanket. She had never imagined that this life, this partnership, would be possible. Once, she had been the Omega, cast aside and forgotten. Now, she was the Luna, standing beside the Alpha King, not as an accessory to his power, but as a partner, as someone who mattered. "We'll face whatever comes," Chloe said, her voice steady and strong. "Together, we're unstoppable." Maximus looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and something even deeper, something she hadn't seen before, but now recognized as trust. "I believe that," he said, his voice low and filled with certainty. The world outside the castle walls might be uncertain, and their path ahead might be fraught with challenges, but in that moment, standing together in the royal garden, Chloe knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. No longer would she be the Omega who was cast aside. She was his Luna, and together, they would shape the future of their kingdom, one step at a time. The days passed with an ease that Chloe had never thought possible. The weight of responsibility, once so heavy on Maximus's shoulders, was now shared between them. It was a quiet power, the kind that came from understanding each other without words, the kind that came from knowing they had each other's backs, no matter the storm. Chloe had grown more confident in her role as Luna, not just by the title, but by the trust she had earned from the pack and from Maximus. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she was enough, but every time she looked at Maximus, every time he smiled at her with such warmth and sincerity, she knew she was. They had their quiet moments, of course, moments when the weight of everything they faced seemed too much. And when that happened, they would retreat to their private spaces, away from the eyes of the pack, where they could simply be themselves. It was in these moments that Chloe saw the man behind the king, the man who was just as vulnerable, just as uncertain as anyone else. One evening, after a long day of court duties, Maximus led Chloe out to the terrace. The moon was full, casting a soft glow over the courtyard, and the stars twinkled like tiny jewels in the night sky. Chloe leaned against the stone railing, taking in the beauty of the night. Maximus stood beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. "It's peaceful tonight," Chloe remarked, her voice soft. Maximus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It is," he agreed, though Chloe could tell his mind was elsewhere. She turned to face him, sensing the weight on his shoulders. "What's bothering you?" she asked gently. Maximus sighed, a deep, weary sound, before looking down at her. "There's always something," he said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of 1,000 decisions. "But lately, I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next. I'm not sure I'm ready for what's ahead." Chloe reached out, her hand resting on his arm. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the quiet unease that had taken root in him. "Maximus," she said softly, "you don't have to face it alone." He looked at her, his expression softening as he took in the sincerity in her eyes. "I know," he said quietly, "but you deserve more than this. You deserve more than a life spent in the shadow of a king's burdens." Chloe smiled, her fingers gently brushing against his skin. "I don't need more," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "I only need you. I always have." Maximus's gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. "You're all I've ever needed," he whispered, his hand reaching for hers. Chloe's heart swelled as their fingers intertwined, the simple touch grounding them both in a way that words never could. For a long time, they stood there, side by side, watching the night unfold around them. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Chloe wasn't afraid. Together, they would face whatever came. The pack, the kingdom, the world. They were all just pieces of a much larger picture, and together, they would navigate it. The bond they shared was unbreakable, not just by fate, but by choice. And Chloe knew, deep in her heart, that she had found her place. Not just as his Luna, but as his partner, his equal. And with that, she knew they could face anything.